Um, Hello, 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 and welcome to yet another Motor1.com Test Car Happy Hour. Yes, we're all bopping from the intro music, which we love. We've got a special episode. We've got questions and comments in the chat already. We've got a very special guest, the godfather of electric vehicles and electric vehicle charging, Mr. Tom Moloughney from InsideEVs, from the State of Charge YouTube channel, and probably from many other enterprises that I'm not even quite aware of at this point. Tom, so great to have you over on the quote-unquote Motor One side for a bit this afternoon.
Thanks for having me, guys. It's fun to be here.
We've got Mr. Brandon Turkus, managing editor of Motor1.com. Brandon, say hello. And then we've got senior editors, two of them. We've got Jeff Perez. We've got Brett Evans. And you guys, we are talking not about the cars that we drove last week, I don't think. Somebody will have to correct me if we drove one of these vehicles in the previous week. But instead, while it's still January, we decided to take a little bit of time and talk about some of our very favorite cars that we drove in 2022 and some of our least favorite cars that we drove in 2022. Now, I know we have this set up. I think we wrote best and worst, which is fine. There's an article that you can find on Motor1.com where you can read a little bit more in depth about the vehicles that we're going to talk about too. I'll set the stage in saying, like, I don't actually think these are what we consider the best and the worst objectively as journalists, as an organization, as, you know, Motor One and InsideEVs. This was much more personally, like, what did we enjoy, what spoke to us, and what just didn't click with us when we drove it last year, right? So it should be fun. We've got a lot of cars to talk about and a reasonably limited time before it's, you know, beer o'clock and we all have to go on a Friday afternoon. So we're gonna get through that. But as ever, no matter where you guys are watching, whether you are viewing this on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, wherever you're seeing it streamed, please, you can leave a comment or a question right there for us. And if we love it, we'll throw it up on the screen. We'll definitely try and answer any questions yeah, make it a party. So without further ado, I'm going to start with Jeff Perez, just because he's right next to me in this joint. Jeff, I'll throw it to you. We'll start with either a best or a worst. We don't need to do two at once. But are you feeling a little bit more negative or a little bit more positive at this point?
Let's start with the negative, just so we can get out of the way. I think if you've read any of my reviews on a lot of the modern BMW M cars, you know that I'm kind of a little bit of a hater on some of them, and you guys can, you know, angry comment in my post, rightfully so. But for me, this year, the X4M competition was a hard one. And like Seth said, it's definitely not a bad car. Like, it's not a slow car. It is a fast car. It's maybe not a good looking car, but to me, it just didn't like meet all the marks, especially when you can get like an X5M, which has more space and is arguably better to drive, better engine, like, just, I don't know. It just didn't do it for me. It was the one car that I remember really like giving away after a week and being like, I am kind of glad that thing is gone. So
it's funny because obviously I haven't driven everything that everybody else here has, especially over the course of the last year. But BMW is one that comes up. I feel like when BMWs show up at our houses, we tend to be pretty bipolar about it. They're cars that we're either really excited about or surprisingly happy about, or cars that are pretty disappointing for us. Has anybody else in the group been in the X4M or have similar feelings as Jeff?
I mean, the thing with, especially with BMWs over the past, 4 or 5 years, is that they've become so uncompromising and so firm and stiff and brittle and unpleasant, and that you're constantly battling with those qualities to find the enjoyment in them. And it didn't used to be that way.
Yeah.
And I think the SUVs are among the worst of it because, they're somehow even firmer than the sedans. It's like they're kind of trying to make up for the fact that they are, tall, heavy things. And it's really hard to get into one and be like, you know what, I could drive this every day. I enjoy this. It feels like a constant battle to find the joy in the car because it's so focused on being like hardcore and fast and capable and wild.
I would imagine, especially in competition form, that's extra hard to do, right, Jeff? Like, Does the X4 have the same sort of competition seats as the other models too, like those super rigid car, which I love, by the way, but it feels like a tense mix of track stuff in a very non-track oriented package form factor.
Yeah, I'm trying to go back and look at my review now. I don't think these had the extra stiff or the extra rigid kind of bucket seats. I think they were the ones that were like a step down from that. But I'm pretty sure you can get those crazy seats or a version of those seats. And that's just like, why? Like, what's the point of that? Like, this car is so hardcore and like the suspension is so rigid, like Brandon said, it's just so uncomfortable to drive.
Yeah, I fully get it. I think that I've been on the record over the years as not being a huge fan of M tuned SUV and crossover products. Every once in a while, there's some that are really great that stand out that are phenomenal, but
Yeah.
for the most part, they're not my favorite things in the BMW stable. So I
Yeah.
guess it's a fancy, fast, and expensive vehicle with really great paint in the version that we're looking at right now. But I kind of get it. Like, it didn't quite hit the mark with you, Jeff, and it does make sense as one of your least favorites, I guess, throughout the year to me. Let me hit real quick, guys, because we've got some comments coming in. First of all, hello to Kevin, hello to Gary. Thank you guys as ever for tuning in. Gary, you probably saw, or I'm sorry, Tom, you saw Gary is giving you a personal hello, so perhaps he is a Tom Moloughney fan. No surprise.
Well, he's a InsideEVs podcast fan. He's a frequent commenter on our podcast too.
I love Gary. Gary's always on here chopping it up with us too, so we owe him a lot. But hello as well to Jonathan Brown, who we also see quite often. Jonathan says Z06 is the best car released in 2022. Certainly, you can make an argument for that. I think that Mr. Turkus has driven it, had a lot of great things to say about it. I'm not sure if it's going to pop up in the conversation today, but it's definitely a worthy one to talk about. And then just to hit some of these quickly, hey to David Lutz, the worst of 2022, anything over $100,000 because only 1% find it appealing. I think that's very fair. Although we're certainly going to talk about some vehicles that crest six figures.
Maybe even 7.
Whoa, yeah, exactly. That's right. And then
mine is over 8 for what it's worth.
We'll just do a quick show of hands here for those of you who have been in it. We could do M5 competition. How many of you are fans of the M5 competition?
See, that's the thing, Gary. Like some of the M cars really work for me. Like the M5 competition, I love. The M240i, I absolutely love. And then you have like the X4s and some of those other ones that
the
are
SUVs. I think Brandon hit it. I think it's just that they compensate too hard for being SUVs, whereas even a big sedan has a dynamic advantage.
I say one of the best drives I had this past year was it was like a 2-hour like Autobahn run in an M5 CS, and it was just a delight. Like it was so simple and so comfortable. So it's definitely an SUV problem.
But Brendan, so on that note, have you driven the iX?
Yes.
Just curious how you felt about that, because that's a BMW SUV, and you were really critical on the feel of the BMW SUVs.
The M SUV.
We're talking about M,
just the M.
X5,
Okay.
X5M, X6M, X4M.
Well, they have the
iX M60 is like an M car light. It's like the M340 that Seth is driving right now, or like.
And haven't we said that it's probably not worth the extra cost over the?
It is absolutely not worth the extra cost. No.
And I haven't driven the X5M. I've driven the other versions of the iX. I mean, the iX, the M version of it yet. But because I found that was one of my bigger surprises when I first drove the iX. I went to the iX i4 drive, and I was fully expecting to love the i4, but kind of be like, yeah, this is nice, the iX. But I walked away saying if I had to buy one of them, I would buy an iX over an i4. And that's how I felt after the whole driving experience and what it offers and everything. That's why I wanted to see what you thought about that.
Yeah, we had an iX out at Star Awards, as a lot of you know, and I think that we all really loved it. I think it's a great package, but again, like maybe the biggest thing holding it back was pricing, honestly, and weird styling. I think some people would throw the weird nose out there too. But Tom, we're gonna go to you next because we've got a lot of Tom fans here saying hello. So I'm just forgive me if I don't give you all shout outs, but we'll say thank you so much for joining. We need to obviously have Mr. Moloughney on more often. So Tom, you picked. Do you want to talk about your most favorite or your least favorite 2022 to start?
Well, I'll do most favorite first of all. Those of you that follow me on the InsideEVs podcast and on InsideEVs and wherever else I am know that I'm just a huge Taycan fan. I love Taycans. I've driven every single version of them so far. Porsche's kind enough to invite me to every event they have with Taycan. I was even the first to drive some of their models where they specifically allowed me to drive it before anybody else. And I picked the Taycan Sport Turismo, which you see me there charging up. They had the drive for the Sport Turismo and also the Taycan GTS out in California. And I tell you, just driving that through the winding roads, and I was just like, this, how is this a wagon? You know, with how well it behaved and how perfectly balanced it was. And, you know, it's crazy. And you get the utility of having that, you know, like the wagon styling, plus the performance of a Taycan. The interior, I think, is the nicest version of the Taycan, what they do for the GTS and the Sport Turismo trim. The adaptive air suspension is just, I mean, I couldn't tune it better if they just tuned it for me. And so that's why I picked that as my favorite. Yes, it is 133,000. It's a lot. But if you look at the Taycan line, it sits between the Cross Turismo 4S and the Cross Turismo Turbo, and of course much less than Turbo S. So you know, if you're in the game for a Taycan, this is not even near the top end. And I think what you get for this is just nuts. I would have to, you know, for me, that's my Taycan.
And that's always been the appeal of the GTS line. And it's so sad. Like they really just straddle the very best part of the Porsche range. And it's so satisfying to see that formula works on an EV as well. And I really like the fact, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the Sport Turismo is only available on the GTS trim.
Yeah.
Everything else is Cross Turismo.
Yes, exactly.
So I mean that just ups the appeal even more for me, because I love the Cross Turismo. It was our Editor's Choice winner back in 2021. But I like the stance of the standard Sport Turismo more, and obviously the GTS powertrain is just, you know, just epic.
We got to hit very quickly the comment about, or the question about whether or not there should be a Taycan coupe. I mean, I think the easy answer is yes. I would say to create separation from, you know, all other future 911 shaped Porsche EV products, that it would have to be the wagon body, right? Like a shooting brake Taycan.
I was going to say like a modern 928. That's what I want. Oh yeah.
Also really cool. I mean, does anybody think that there shouldn't be a coupe version of Porsche's EV powertrain and a beautiful body at this point, whether it's a Taycan or not?
Give me more Taycans. I'll take every version there is. I just love the Taycan.
I want a Taycan monster truck next.
Why not? Lamborghini could make their big SUVs, and let's get a Taycan.
Taycan Dakar. That's what we want.
Tom, you bring up the price, and I think it's really credible. And we had somebody commenting earlier about just I think a little bit snide automotive journalists are reviewing $100,000 cars, and they're only good for the 1%. That's a fair criticism. I do think that we get to review cars that most people can't afford. I would also say, certainly in the case of cars like the Taycan from Porsche, they're cars that are of huge interest across the world, really. So one of the jobs is also just educating, showing people stuff that they might not be able to buy, but are also really interested in. So there's an element of fantasy to some of this, no question. But I do think that directionally, some of the expensive stuff points to what real people will be able to afford in coming model years and coming decades, for sure. So I do think that it's important. Great pick. All right, let's go, Brett. Brett, what do you got for me? Best or worst?
We can make this one really quick. It's my worst of 2022, and it's one of those cars, again, that there's nothing inherently wrong with it, but it was just kind of very forgettable. It was a Jeep Compass. Mine was fully loaded. It was knocking on the door of $40,000, which is a lot of money for this particular, it's one of these tweener cars. It's not quite the size of a CRV. It's not quite as small as an HRV, but it just kind of doesn't. It struck a weird balance. It didn't do anything particularly well to justify being 40 grand, especially when our Star Award winning Kia Sportage SX Prestige Hybrid was about the same price, and it was just so much better. So this is kind of a car that I realize that people probably are buying them with cash on the hood, so they're probably not actually paying $40,000, but it was just pretty forgettable. And I didn't have a lot of, when it was time to choose my worst car, I couldn't come up with one that I didn't like, and I had to go through my list, and this was one of the ones that I completely forgot that I drove, just because it wasn't memorable in any way.
So, I mean, we know, right? Like there are crossovers out there like the Compass, which are maybe a little bit less, less than average, a little bit, not great these days. But I think more importantly, you're right. Like pointing out the Kia, $35,000 to $40,000 right now is a reasonably narrow band that buys you an incredible crossover. Whether you want to get the Kia that we really liked, we brought along the CRV, the new CRV to Star Awards, which wasn't like a massive favorite there, but I think we'd all still say is a very competent vehicle. There's just like tons and tons of great utility vehicles in that price zone right now, which makes something like the Compass just not being exceptional. It's an easy pass, I guess.
Yeah. Well, and that's not to say it doesn't have its good points. The new interior is really nice. It looks really, really attractive. And, I spent a lot of time in that thing just commuting to and from some various errands. And it was fine. It didn't do anything terrible. It just didn't blow me away.
So one of the things that I'm really excited about is that Jeep added a new 2-liter turbo. I mean, not really a new 2-liter turbo. It's the same 2-liter turbo they've sold in the Wrangler and other stuff to the Compass for 2023, which I think will be a big improvement over the 2.4. Because we actually owned a Compass. It was my wife's car for 3 years, and yeah, I agree with pretty much everything you said, Brett. It's just kind of forgettable,
marginal.
But I think a little bit more power will go a long way in that.
All right, Brandon, keep talking. Let's go with your best or worst at this point.
Let's talk worse. It's the Honda CR-V for all of the reasons that Brett highlighted in the Compass.
As I shouted out. No sooner I shouted out. Yeah.
The Honda CR-V is a great car. It sells in incredible numbers. It appeals to a huge range of people. I am just not one of those people in this particular generation. It just feels very, very anonymous and uninteresting. I don't love the new exterior design. The powertrain is very good, but also very, very familiar. It feels like a vehicle. It just feels like it's just there, and there's nothing wrong with that. For a lot of people, it's going to work out just fine. I certainly understand why anyone would why people buy CR-Vs, but it's not my cup of tea.
A lot of people buy CR-Vs.
A lot of people, yeah. Obviously, there's something about this. I think you can make the argument that there's actually something wrong with me rather than the CR-V for not liking.
Yeah, I like the CR-V. I mean, I didn't love it, like you said. It was just kind of bland and not super exciting. But as far as a compact crossover goes, I don't know which other one I'd recommend other than maybe our Star Award-winning Kia Sportage. But that's it.
And that's really the problem with the CR-V is that segment has over the past decade or so has just exploded in terms of choice and style, and the CR-V, especially in its current generation, feels like an old product already. And I think that's a big problem. I think it's something that Honda has fought with before. I think back to the CR-V from a couple generations ago that was rolling out with like halogen headlights and a physical key and a naturally aspirated engine at a time when the competition was doing away with all of that stuff. And that car just it appealed to people, but it didn't feel competitive. It didn't feel as good as Honda could build it. Yeah, Gary says in here, Honda is coasting. I think, and I wouldn't quite go that far, but I think in the case of this CR-V, I think the company could have gone quite a bit further.
My point of view is that, I'll take issue with that, Gary. And I don't think that, Brandon, you're saying anything particularly wrong. I think maybe for you, there's a dissonance between the kind of excellence that Honda usually hits and the step that they took from the previous CR-V to the current CR-V. I would also say I actually really like the CR-V, but you guys heard me, kind of wax on about it when we were testing it. Like some of the things that I really loved about it are like, I think that it's got really subtle, it's got kind of sublime steering. but it's a mid-sized, it's a small crossover, right? Like, who cares? Nobody who's shopping in that segment really cares about it having like incredibly smooth steering with like good feedback, right? So
the thing I think about with especially cars in that class is people buy them and they don't necessarily want to feel like everyone else on the road. They're looking for that individuality and that statement vehicle, and the CRV doesn't make a bad statement. It just makes no statement at all.
I think that's maybe the point of this generation of CRV, though, is I feel like you have vehicles like the Tucson and the Sportage, both of which have like very exuberant designs. Even to a certain extent, the Rogue is like a very unique kind of polarizing design. And Honda went with mature with this CRV, and maybe that reads a little bit boring, quite frankly.
Are you calling me immature, Brett?
Yeah, if you want to read between the lines, yeah, go for it. No, I think that what they're going for is the kind of people who look at all those crazy slashes and lines on the Sportage and the Hyundai, the Tucson, or the RAV4, and kind of say, oh, that's not for me, and they're going to go to a Honda dealer and they're going to find this relatively anonymous but undeniably like decent looking SUV and think that that's for them. And I don't, it's not like you said, Brandon, it's not for you, it's not for me, but it is for a certain customer that just kind of wants a good car that'll just get them where they want to go.
I will just say I'm going out to drive the new Honda Pilot next week, so I expect to get roasted for this conversation as soon as I get there.
I'm gonna rewind for 1 minute because David Lutz, thanks for joining us, has thrown out a couple questions, and he had an interesting point that maybe Tom has some insight on. He said, I'm not sure if Aptera is considered a 2022 offering, but the fact that most people drive with one or two people in the car, its form follows function and meets the need of most people and is extremely efficient. For those of you that are unfamiliar, the Aptera is this, it's not side by side even, it's front back, right? Like 2-person seating.
I think it's a 2+2, yeah.
No, it's a 1+1, right?
Oh, 1+1.
Yeah.
Right.
1+1, kind of a very futuristic pod car, right? Interesting concept. My comment to David would be, I think that you're wrong. I think that whether that's practical for most people or not, most people do not want that narrow of margin around their practicality. But Tom, what's your point of view on Aptera?
Well, I should have a better point of view soon because I'm quietly arranging to drive in one in a couple of weeks. So I'm hoping that I had this all set up for the first week in December, and then they had to cancel on me, and then we're rebooting that supposedly for early February. But I think it's a cool vehicle. I don't know how I don't know how many people that's going to appeal to. The kind of innovators and early adopters look at something like that and say, "Oh my God, this is really cool." But like it's classified as a motorcycle. Don't forget, it doesn't have to have crash testing. That's going to be concerning to people. They haven't released any type of crash testing data yet, although they have crash tested it. And at some point, I believe they are going to show that information. But, I think it's a cool concept. I liked it when it first came out. This is the second go around for this company. I don't know if you guys remember. Back in like 2008, when I was just getting involved with EVs, I was trying to pre-order one and they wouldn't take my order because I lived in New Jersey and they were only taking orders in California. And I just thought it looked like like an airplane and a car converged.
Right.
But I should have some more thoughts on that once I drive in it, hopefully within a couple of weeks. But I think it's cool, and I like what e-mobility is doing. It's creating this whole it's saying anything goes. You can start with a clean sheet of paper. You could make something that nobody was making before. And I think that that's also making some of the legacy brands look at different aspects of what they're doing and think outside of the box. Like with Rivian with the gear tunnel, for instance.
Yeah.
Did any company ever even think of that? So I know they couldn't with a drive shaft or whatever, but that's one of the things I like about e-mobility. It's giving us things that we would not have gotten before.
So I co-sign all of that. I think it's really interesting, and it'll be fun to see whether or not some of these mobility products, or there are multiple right now that are on the market. I think as a whole, the market is doing better than expected, quite well, especially over the last 2 years. But there's not really a dominant player, so it'll be cool to see whether or not anybody does kind of step out of the crowd a bit to become dominant. But and as our good friend Dominic Ioni points out, I think it's neat, definitely a niche vehicle. Cool. So we'll look for more on that from you, Tom, on InsideEVs, and we do have a lot more e-mobility stuff, both news and reviews on InsideEVs too, so you guys can find that all there. All right, I'll go now. I'm going to also start with my worst, and we'll stick with electric. One of the 2,000 plus, can be 1,000 horsepower vehicles that I'll talk about today, and my least favorite drive of the year was unfortunately the Hummer EV. And I want to go ahead and say right now that some of this was just context, I think. Brandon and Tom, you guys, I believe, both did first drive programs for this, so maybe had more of an experience driving it off-road in really rugged situations where you could see the absolute power of the kind of, the off-road technologies that are there, the ability for it to kind of go anywhere, scramble over rocks, the true usefulness of God, why am I? It's not tank turn. I'm totally blanking on the
crab walk.
Right. The true usefulness of crab walk and the super tight turning radius. I think there on the trail and off road in that kind of rugged environment, it probably absolutely sings. But for me, driving it sort of in the suburbs on our drive route on Star Awards, it felt so much heavier. Honestly, for all the power, it didn't feel nearly as quick as other EVs with less power because it's so heavy. There's this sort of underlying problem with the fact that it's a brand new EV with General Motors, one of the biggest corporations in the entire world, brand new battery pack, and yet the efficiency is a little bit lackluster. It's very expensive, and then there's also just kind of a little bit of a vibe problem too. For me, I got in there and I appreciate all of the design work. I think that it's really neat. I think that for the right person, it'll really come together and feel great. But for me, it was a little bit hard to read. It was a little bit too sort of, I don't know, G.I. Joe, I guess, inside in a way that I didn't really appreciate. So this one never really came together for me. You guys can feel free to tell me that I'm wrong on this one or agree with me, I suppose.
No, I don't think you're wrong at all. I think it's GMC made a very curious decision in going like whole hog, like 3-motor, like super off-road truck body. For this first vehicle, I don't want to write the Hummer off yet, because it is fantastic off-road. I'm very eager to get into the SUV with a little bit more space inside, with a less compromised wheel tire package. I think there's some goodness there, but I if you're only driving this thing on paved roads, it doesn't feel quite as at home as some similarly priced, similarly powerful EVs would.
I think the thing that the Hummer does really well is it makes EVs cool for a very particular buyer. And I think that you could spend $120,000 on a fully loaded emissions deleted aftermarket, F350, whatever, and I think that if a Hummer EV takes one of those off the road, it will have solved this mission. And I'm not talking about law-abiding diesel trucks, like those have a place. I'm talking about those emissions deleted, like black smoke belching diesels. And I think that the Hummer EV, its job is to convince people who might otherwise do that to go for an EV. And I think it'll probably be successful because it is really just like cool and big and bold. I don't think it needs to be efficient. It just needs to get people to stop emissions deleting diesel trucks.
I think John and some other people said in the comments that it really is just a status symbol. It's like a super truck, right? Like you're not going to love every supercar that's out there, but some people will really love certain cars. And I think that the Hummer is kind of that, has that same sort of aspect of like a hypercar, supercar thing. And to Seth's point, it is like really uninviting inside. At least for me, it was like just hard plastic and rubber and metal, and just, it felt really, really aggressive. And again, that's maybe something that certain buyers will want, but I want something that's a little more comfortable when I get in the driver's seat.
I pretty much agree with all you guys. And I've had a lot of experience driving it. And for a while, I had it in my driveway with my Rivian R1T and my Lightning. So I had these three trucks in my driveway side by side. And I put together an article and a video on comparing all the features. And I really did it going into it without really thinking who was going to win. Just like going, okay, this is what this truck does. This is how this truck does this and this. And when I added everything up at the end, the Hummer got killed by the Rivian and the Lightning. And it wasn't even close. And, it's the most expensive version of it. And it really, it doesn't do anything better than those trucks other than look at me. Hey, everybody, look at me. And everywhere you go, it's a showstopper. I mean, you can't, when you drive down the road with this, everybody is looking at you. And, to me, it's fun to have. I would not want one. Out of those 3 trucks, it's way dead last for me. And I'd love to drive it on the weekend, have some fun with it, but I would not take this as a daily driver. It's way down on the bottom of my list. So the rear steering is the best, though. I wish the Lightning and the R1T had rear steering, because that really makes a huge difference with big trucks like these.
Rear steering is huge. I agree. I think, where I live, like the hippie enclave of Ann Arbor, Michigan, it's also difficult to envision driving one of these day to day. I think people would look at you weird, even if they did know that it was an EV. So you're making some kind of statement when you're in this kind of vehicle. And the statement that you're making, I suppose, varies based on who's looking. But let's keep moving along. I almost said let's keep humming along, but there I did it. All right, are we back to you, Jeff? Mr. Perez, let's talk about your very favorite vehicle your favorite drive anyway of 2022.
Yeah, so I think someone in the comments mentioned how we journalists only drive super fancy, expensive cars, and I think that's true because my favorite car this year was the Rimac Nevera, a 1900 horsepower, $2.5 million electric hypercar. It is. I should also preface this by saying I also drove a Chiron this year, first time I've ever been in a Bugatti, and getting in the Rimac compared to the Bugatti feels like a next step even above that.
It was high cotton for Jeff Perez in 2022.
Yeah, it really was.
Amazing. Good pull, super producer Kyle there. Gary Clark said, a long time ago, we spilling the beans about the Nevera that got bumped by a bike or that bumped a bike. I don't think that we have that story, but
so
we know that story.
So I can give you a little bit of detail on that story. The car that was hit by the bike during Pebble Beach was one of the 2 that they had out there. It was actually the green one that I drove, even though my review had the pictures of the white one. And what happened was it hit a motorcycle hit the back bumper, full carbon fiber, and it kind of just shattered the piece. So what Rimac did was they overnighted a new carbon fiber bumper from Croatia, and they got it to Pebble Beach in 24 hours. And there was a picture that their PR person showed me of the bumper coming through customs, and it was really interesting. So that's pretty cool. But yeah, that was the big story from Pebble Beach.
Certainly. Go ahead, Brandon.
I was going to say, so what did you like about it besides the fact that it had 1900 horsepower?
Right.
That's it. That's the only thing.
That's it? That's it? Okay.
No,
Moving
on.
It
really is. I mean, it is unbelievably fast. Like that's the highlight, right? Like it is crazy fast. It also has this really interesting, I'm going to have to look it up now. It's a torque vectoring feature, right? Where you can basically go all out in the corners, foot flat to the floor in the corners, and it'll go as fast as that car can go without killing you. And I know that's like, I'm not explaining it super well, but it's basically just, it's a
fear.
Yeah. That was one of the highlights. The interior is really nice. Like it is a really comfortable car. It doesn't feel super unattainable like a Bugatti might or some other ones. But it was really amazing. I was really blown away, and I only spent 30 minutes in that car, but yeah, it was quickly one of my favorite cars of all time.
But did you have the nerves to go into a corner with it full throttle and trust the car?
I
don't think I could do that.
Well, one of their engineers was sitting passenger, right? And the first corner we hit, he said, full throttle. And I was like, I'm not doing that. There's no way I'm doing that. It's crazy. And so I got it to like half throttle. And he's like, no, you faster. You got to go full throttle. I'm like, all right. So I did full throttle the next corner. And it was my brain and my body were telling me, do not do this. Don't do what you're doing. But the car just controlled it and managed it. And it was insanely fast around the corner. It was crazy.
So we're getting roasted a little bit for choosing expensive vehicles, especially in this case, a 7-figure one. I just want to point out to everybody watching, totally understood. remember, we are simple human beings that have the awesome opportunity to drive a lot of vehicles. This is merely what we loved the most this year. If we're ever rating anything, if we're ever reviewing anything, of course we consider price as one of the top, if not the very single most important thing that matters to people in terms of a review. So please don't.
I have many great reviews on Motor1.com on Kia products and Nissan.
I mean,
some of the most affordable cars.
Most of us, our favorite car, one of our favorite cars this year was a $25,000 hybrid pickup. So we know how to do cheap. We can do cheap just fine.
I also just have to quickly say hi to Melody of 1974 for being in Ypsilanti. Hello, my near neighbor. All right, we're cooking. Tom, what was your favorite vehicle? Oh no, you started with your favorite. What was your least favorite vehicle of the year of 2022?
So I'm going to go with the Toyota BZ4X. You know, it's such a disappointment to me. You know, Toyota has been slow walking electrification for so long. I mean, they've been denigrating electrification. They ran an ad over in the UK that "we choose not to plug in" was their slogan for a while. And, you know, I think they've got a little bit of the innovator's dilemma going on over there, where they're so good at hybrids, and it's been such a cash cow for them for so long that they just can't get beyond that, because, you know, this is what they do, make these incremental improvements to their hybrids and just keep improving them, selling the hell out of them. And now, you know, the industry's telling them you got to go in this direction, and they just refuse to do it. So I was hoping that their first real all-electric car, and I know they made the all-electric RAV4, a couple iterations of that, but it was a pure compliance car.
Yeah,
I was hoping that their first EV, they were just going to surprise us and be like, boom. And we're going to be like, oh, this is what they've been doing. Like, this thing's, you know, kicks Tesla's ass, you know, and, but they come out with this that, you know, doesn't go very far. The range isn't terrible. So depending on the versions, you get between 250 and 220. You know, not terrible, but, you know, not anything amazing. It charges terribly. You know, if you get the top of the line trim, it actually charges slower than the cheaper one because they use different batteries. So the less expensive one can charge at 150 kilowatts, but if you get the all-wheel drive limited, it can only charge at 100 kilowatts. And most people are reporting it really tops out at like 80 kilowatts. So, I mean, you know, you're talking,
yikes, you
know, what EVs charged at 7-8 years ago. And it just, the whole thing about it was just so uninspiring to me. And it kills me because I know Toyota can make a good EV. They have more experience with batteries than anybody, more than Tesla. Toyota's been putting batteries in cars for how long now? How many millions of cars have they sold with batteries? Now, they're not pure electric, but they know battery tech, and they could have done such a good job with this. And they put this pedestrian effort, like, yep, here we go. And then as soon as it gets launched, the wheels start falling off, and it takes them 3 months to fix that. What if this was their latest RAV4, their next generation RAV4, and a couple of weeks after they started selling it, the wheels were falling off? How fast do you think they would have a solution to fix that, guys? You think it would have taken 3 months and told their customers just park all your RAV4s? So it's just, they're just not into it. And to me, that's fine. You know, keep selling what works for you. I'm not forcing them to do it. I think they'll regret it, but it was just a disappointment to me. So that's my biggest disappointment.
It's always frustrating. Toyota's a great example. General Motors comes under this criticism quite a lot. When one of the world's most impressive automakers, you said you made a great point, Tom, that Toyota has got, you know, decades of experience with batteries right now. They also have, you know, you could make the argument, probably one of the most fantastic core of engineers as an organization in the entire world, right? Like, they absolutely have the core capabilities to do this right. And they have, you know, a vested interest in maybe it not being the thing that they're spending all of their R&D money on right now, or over the last 5 years. Are they going to turn it around and probably make some really excellent cars down the road? I would argue yes. I think that they EVs down the road. I think that they have to do it. But I don't think that this isn't what I would call a full faith effort in that, in terms of what we're seeing in this product right now. I just also want to point out that I think it looks like dog shit. Is that too strong? It looks real bad.
Everything about it. Like really, this is what we were waiting for? Because we were all kind of waiting, at least on the EV side, really waiting for Toyota's first effort. Like, okay, they've been saying EVs aren't the future. We're going to go right to hydrogen. Okay, you know, let's see what happens. But we were all kind of thinking behind the scenes, like, yeah, they're probably working on something. It's going to come out and they're going to be like, oh, by the way, here's our EV. And we're going to be like, holy wow, this thing's awesome. But then womp womp, you know, and it's like, okay, they really aren't working on something behind the scenes. So yeah, we'll see.
All right, good one. All right, who's next? I've lost track of the order. Who has to go? Mr. Turkus.
I'll go next. What the hell? So Jeff did not have the most expensive car that any of us drove this year. My favorite is, they wouldn't confirm the price beyond saying the low 8-figure range. But it is the Mercedes-Benz Vision EQXX concept car.
Yes.
You cannot buy one of these, no matter how much money you throw at them. It is wild, but I chose it not because it's some revelatory thing to drive it, but because it really feels like what the ideal future of electrification is, where there's an intense focus on aerodynamics and low weight and just smart engineering. If you look at like the passive cooled battery in this thing, the adjustable aerodynamics, the things that it does to squeeze every little mile out of the battery, which is a relatively average size battery, is just absolutely wild to me. Mercedes has done 2 record runs in this thing, both of them well over like 620 miles to a charge on the first attempt. It's absolutely wild, and it really has me excited for what EVs could become. This thing is incredibly light. I mean, the battery pack alone is something like half the weight of a traditional liquid cooled battery. That's insane. The drag coefficient is super slippery. When you let off and start to coast down a hill, it almost feels like it's accelerating because the aerodynamics are so efficient. There's no drag on the vehicle to slow it down. It's a masterpiece of engineering. And it's actually, it looks pretty cool. It looks wild. The interior is beautifully appointed. I mean, it is not just some concept car with an all plastic interior. It is a crafted interior with some really, breathtaking design details. Brett's also ridden in it. It's got these little lava spike thingies in the door, and like, yeah, you can kind of see them in that image. You've got this vehicle spanning dash that shows you, how efficiently you're driving, but also like what the solar panels on the roof are doing. It's just all of these different things come together to create a very, very efficient driving experience. And for me, like I'm gonna nerd out on this. It is so cool, and kind of the opposite of what Tom was saying, where it's like, you see a brand like Toyota and this is what they do. You look at this and like, it's a brand like Mercedes. That is what they do. It's a testament to what this automaker can do. It's wild. I'm rambling at this point, but I'm so excited about this car.
Mercedes, with some of the most impressive electric vehicles that you can actually buy right now, is also throwing this down to say like, hey, we're now, but we're also next if this is what follows, right? And I think it's a really bold statement. We talked a little bit about some of the upstarts, the non-traditional automakers that are EV makers right now. I think they have some impressive stuff too, but really you've got to hand it to Mercedes in terms of having both the product on the ground right now and the vision, no pun intended, about what's coming in the future. I think it's incredibly impressive and a really cool car. Brett, did you have any quick thoughts on this one since you've also been in it?
Yeah, I just think it's really impressive that it has all the show car wizardry, like the long tail and the active aerodynamics and stuff like that, but the battery itself is going to appear in 2024 or 2025 under the replacement for the A-Class. Like they are going in. This isn't just a technological showpiece. And speaking of that A-Class, I also think it's very cool that Mercedes they're going to do an internal combustion version, but it's going to be engineered around the electric vehicle platform. Whereas before, when you had an ICE and a EV vehicle, it was always the EV that had the sacrifice. And Mercedes is going the opposite. They're saying we're going to engineer around EV powertrains and offer the lower cost ICE powertrain, but that's the one that's going to take the compromise. EVs are going to be the focus, which I think is a really forward thinking move on their part.
Absolutely. Guys, we might be losing Jeff. He has a hard stop right about now. So thank you for joining. We'll wave goodbye. We're going to keep
going.
Bye,
everybody.
Couple more cars to talk about. I just also want to recognize too, I really appreciate all the comments. There's a lively discussion happening right now about Toyota's overall quality and maybe perception of quality too. We're not gonna veer into that right now, although I do think it's fascinating. I encourage all of you to read and comment more. All right, Brett, let's keep going with you. Let's talk about your winner, your best drive of the year last year.
Well, we were just talking about forward-thinking technology and looking forward to the future of electrification and lower emissions and everything like that, which is exactly why my favorite vehicle this year that I drove was the Cadillac CT5V Blackwing.
Amazing.
This was not an intentional segue. I do really very strongly believe in the future of EVs, but this was still just so much fun. This was such a hoot to drive. It's got a 6-speed manual transmission, supercharged 6.2 liter V8 with upwards of 660 horsepower, just like absolutely bonkers. They dropped it off in my driveway, and I didn't drive it for the first day because I had to build up the courage to get behind the wheel. And when I did, finally, it was actually a lot more genteel and easy to drive than I was expecting. Thanks to it's got this incredible performance traction system that just like you put it in you put it in sport or race, and it gives you just enough slip to have fun without sending yourself end over end. So it was just brilliant. It's a really cool car. I think we've all driven it, and we all had a pretty good time with it. And it's kind of just a fun way to send off that supercharged V8.
One of the most like beautifully managed suspensions on a performance car that I've driven in a really, really long time. Obviously, we had it on the track, we had it on the road. I think it really it varies a lot from being just a nice kind of almost traditional luxury like cushy experience to being really razor sharp. And the powertrain is simply phenomenal. So yeah, it is awesome to see. Like, obviously we've talked a lot. We're going to continue to talk a lot about electric vehicles for sure. That is the future. But we are, we'd be remiss if we didn't mention that this is a really awesome kind of like send-off period for some of the best ICE vehicles that the world has ever seen, right? And I don't know whether or not the CT5 Blackwing will ultimately rise to that level, but it sure is fun. So I really dig that car.
It was great. It was a whole lot of fun on the track. And then, a couple of months ago, we have a great video comparing the CT5 and the CT4 Blackwings.
Yep.
And just had a great time driving them through the canyons. And, they're surprisingly genteel and easy to drive for how much power they have. And it was just a really, really fun. Every time I drive that car, I always smile. And I've been lucky to drive it twice now and probably never drive it again. But glad I had the opportunity.
We've got quickly to John Check. Is the Cadillac all-wheel drive? No, this car is exactly what you need it to be. It is front engine, rear wheel drive with a 6-speed manual transmission. And, it's weird to call it a purist car, but it almost is a purist car, circa 2022 and 23, right?
What's that weird guy on the left of that video?
We don't know him anymore.
Yeah, he's dead to us.
Editor Emeritus Clint Simone off at another publication that we don't need to talk about now. Cool video though. Go back and watch it. All right, I think I'm the only one left, and let's talk about my favorite. We'll hit this pretty quickly. It's a vehicle that I've talked about an awful lot on this podcast and written about on the site. And that is, I'm just going to say the Lucid Air. The only two models that I've actually driven are the Lucid Air Grand Touring and the Grand Touring Performance. Essentially, we're talking about some power difference there. The Grand Touring Performance is, I think, you guys talked. Tom, you picked the Taycan. Obviously, Jeff, who left, had the Remots experience. Like, a lot of you had been in very, very high powered electric vehicles before that accelerated crazily. I hadn't actually been in anything that was an analog since like way, way, way back when Model S debuted, and I had the first one of the very first cars that had ludicrous mode, right? So when I got into the Grand Touring Performance with 1,050 horsepower and did launch control for the first time, I was almost speechless. So there was that. Like, there's just the brutal force of this thing accelerating. How quick it is, kind of from any speed, is incredibly impressive. It's a beautiful package. I think that the shape of the car is really lovely. The interior of the car is gorgeous. And then there are other stuff that I really like about it too. Like, we wrote a little bit about it, have at various points. the technology underpinning all of it. Lucid is doing all of this stuff kind of on its own, incredibly efficient, like very compact motors. They're really kind of thinking ahead of the game, ahead of the curve in terms of how they're putting their powertrain together, which I think is going to net huge benefits for them down the road. But in terms of this conversation, it was just like, it was one of the most surprising, delightful, and impressive driving experience that I had all year. Taking this on some back roads around Northern California, and then later in the year on the track and in Southern California. It's just really a fantastic overall car. And a great effort by a really, really young brand. So
I totally agree, Seth. You know, I've driven Lucids plenty of times. I drove the Dream Edition Performance, you know, on the Dream Edition range, and I did that range test we had. We were the first publication allowed to do an independent range test on a Lucid, and
yep.
That we went 500 miles on the nose with the Dream Edition range, and then the performance, like you said, it's breathtaking. But I do get the chance to drive all these really crazy fast EVs, and I'm spoiled. It's hard for me to tell now, even like which one's faster. I drove the Model S, the new Model S Plaid, and then the Lucid Dream Edition Performance, like within weeks of each other. And it's just, you know, after you do that, you know, I did a bunch of 0 to say 80 runs back to back to back with the Tesla Model S Plaid. I got dizzy.
Yeah.
I had to stop. I had to pull over, and like I felt like I was going to start to hyperventilate. I think the blood drained out of my head. It's the G-force was too much for me to handle. And this is just, it's crazy how powerful some of these new electric vehicles are. It's really nuts.
Yeah, and I think even more impressive to me was like, I mean, yeah, it's fast. You kind of expect it to when you hear 1,000+ horsepower, right? And you've driven EVs before, but man, like on a back road, not on a track, but just on a good curvy road, this thing really kept up. The handling was really subtle. It was rewarding to drive. It was rewarding to drive quickly on a good road, which is something that you can't actually say about most electric vehicles. Up to a point, right? Like we like the low center of gravity, we like the quiet driving experience, but at some level, especially when you're turning, it falls apart a little because it's heavy, and that happened a lot less than I expected with the Lucid. So I do think that their suspension and chassis work is really impressive here as well.
I would agree. Yeah, 100%. They've got some fantastic engineers over there, and their efficiency. Every component in that vehicle was engineered to be as efficient as it possibly can. And that's why they can squeeze out as much range as they can from it. It's, you know, it's an amazing that has it's a big, heavy car, but it has such fantastic efficiency.
Agreed. You guys, we're way over, but thanks so much. This has been a ton of fun. Thank you all for joining and giving your favorite and your least favorite cars this year. Thanks everybody for the great conversation and comments. As always, we'll try and go back. There are a lot of them this time. We'll try and go back after this gets published. If there are any outstanding questions, or if anybody is watching this after we're live and has a specific question, we'll try and answer you on YouTube. But thanks for joining, and look for us again probably next week on Friday. Eventually, we are going to move this podcast to another day. We'll try and give you some warning on that. But in the meantime, yeah, look for us on motor1.com, and thanks for following along. Cheers, everyone.
Take care.
Bye.